going to explain to you real quick. But don't we rolling yet? There's a reason for it.
So I did get that right. I did get that right.
How did you decide to make the book? Because you're an investigative journalist for the LA Times. You did that for 37, 38 years, whatever that was. And you wrote other books, but this book, which is still to me, to me, it's one of the greatest books written about Kirk, and it's maybe one of the best business books I've ever read, because you get into the mind of what was. I mean, it's just incredible to me. It's an incredible book. I'm a big fan.
Thanks a lot. What happened when this one was that I got a phone call from an editor at HarperCollins who had just read Kirk had just died, and she had read his obituary in the New York Times and called to say, "This is incredible. This is somebody who is so incredible, and I've never heard of him. Who is this guy?" And of course, he's coming from Los Angeles. He was a businessman in Los Angeles. He was the richest man in Los Angeles early in his years. Anyway, she said, "Do you know him?" I said, "No, but I knew who he was. You know, he was in our business pages." And I thought, well, she wanted to know more. I'm a reporter. I'll learn about him on the job. It didn't turn out to be quite that easy.
Well, he's a pretty private man, so I'm curious as to where did you start? Everybody, if you guys are just tuning in or whatever, this is The Gambler, written by Bill Rempel. It's like Temple with an R, Rempel. And I cannot suggest more. I probably listen to this book, parts of it once a week, chapter by chapter. And I think when you look at Apple, they can tell you that I played it like, it's probably bordering 100 times now. Yeah. And of course we own copies of it. It's just, how did you get started with this?
The first thing I did was contact his lawyer, Patty Glazer, and she told me that thanks but no thanks. Nobody is going to help you.
Ouch.
He's a very private man. We are going to protect that privacy, and when unsaid was, well, they're going to protect it into the grave. So, and the fact that he was a private man, very private man, he did not run around telling his opinion about anything.
Right.
So I already knew it was going to be difficult, but this was official. In fact, she said no one inside the family or in the estate would cooperate. And so I knew I had something akin to an investigation to do, as opposed to an easily, usually these kind of things you think would be easy because people want to talk about the dearly departed, and he had a lot of friends.
You had a lot of friends.
And so I started with them.
How long did it take you to actually write it, complete it? Like from the time you decided I'm going to do it to the time it was completed, how long did it take you?
Well, I got that phone call from the editor within days of his death, because it was in the obituary in the New York Times, and that was in 1915. I had the contract by the end of that year, and it probably
You mean 2015?
2015.
Okay, got it. Okay, I say 1915.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, 2015.
Yeah. No, that was before my time.
Yeah,
actually.
exactly.
That was before Kirk's time.
It was before my time too.
Yeah. 2015 is when he died, and we got the book project underway, and it was published in January of 2018. So that's how long it took. I mean, it
About
took
3 years.
It took, yeah. And I thought I could do it in a year.
Wow.
But the longer I worked at it, the more people wanted to help.
Oh, really?
Sure. And people who had passed on helping and early on.
Did Alex help you at all?
Yes, he did.
Alex did.
He was a very important source.
What's he doing today?
Well, last time I knew, he and his son, I think, had a business here in Las Vegas with legalized marijuana. They were
really?
They were developing some business around that. I don't know how that's going. I haven't talked to him.
I had a chance to meet him when he was running MGM. I think it was like the third time that Kurt owned MGM.
Yeah,
because there's as everyone knows. So people probably don't know that Kirk Kerkorian bought MGM and really bought control of it when the guys up in Canada, I can't remember their names. They're really important in the media business. Brofmans.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
the Brofmans were the largest.
Bought it from them. I mean, over there, they didn't want to sell.
Over their objections.
Yeah. Well, he bought and sold MGM 3 times.
And now, of course, recently, Amazon's buying it for what, $9.5 billion?
Yeah.
Kurt would be blown away by that, would he not?
No,
he always said it was going to be the unlocked value of this, right?
Oh, well, he understood where the wealth was, or where the value was in the movie business before most people did.
Right.
In the libraries of the old movies. And so he sold it, of course, to Ted Turner, who
that's a great.
Who made
your asshole friends on the phone, Leslie. That was great.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm a John Malone fan, Greg Maffei fan, and I followed John Malone forever because I initially, for a very short time, I was in the cable TV business. My father-in-law was involved in that space, and I was for a very couple of years involved. And Malone is an icon, obviously, of what he's done, right? But I love that part in the book where Ted Turner calls up John Malone early in the morning. Leslie answers the phone, John Malone's wife, and says, "Your asshole friend is on the phone." It's 5 a.m. Because they've been Leslie and John have been together for like ever, right? And they have a great partnership, and I could just envision that conversation taking place, and KNN,
yes.
Kerkorian News Network.
It could have been.
Yeah, exactly. But how did you find out the details about that transaction where he sold? Because it's a little confusing, right? He sold MGM's library to Ted, and Ted created that great channel TBS with all those old shows on it, right? And Tom and Jerry and all that stuff. Yeah. But then somehow Kurt got some of it back. Do you remember all those details? I remember some of them. He bought the naming rights back because really what he was brilliant at was he sold the MGM hotel to Bally's, but only let him use the name for 3 years.
That's right.
So he was always a forward thinker.
He wanted the MGM was like the good seal of approval. He wanted that. That was the value. MGM meant class. MGM meant value. MGM was just he was willing to share it for a while. He did that with Disney too. When Disney had down in Orlando had essentially an MGM lot for. I mean,
I remember that. Yeah.
So, but he wrestled that one back, also. But sometimes he wrestled more than he planned. But but he wanted everybody who worked for MGM to feel like they were with the best company in the world. And
there's so much in this book. I cannot stress. Now, you already have sold the rights, and HarperCollins is the publisher, and so we're not here pitching Bill as much as we are what a brilliant book he wrote. There's so much to learn from this, but one of the things that he did, and we're so off topic, like we're not even into the part where he was a pilot delivering planes, the things he was doing in boxing early on. People don't realize this guy, Kirk Kerkorian, was a boxer, a pilot, a financier. He owned a large portion of Western Airlines. He started his own airlines.
Well, that's exactly what the editor at HarperCollins realizes in the New York Times obit. Here's a man who was a heroic wartime figure, an aviator, flying planes in a place where there were no navigational devices. They flew at night so they could use the stars. I mean, he was a pioneer of aviation.
Pioneer.
He owned every one of the big three auto companies. I mean, was the major
Shareholder.
owner
Yeah.
for all three at one time or another.
Mm-hmm.
He changed the face of Las Vegas. He introduced something called the leisure industry.
No, I people don't realize that there was no big businesses that owned casinos until the rules were changed for him and Howard Hughes, effectively.
Well, they changed the rules.
They did change the rules, right?
Because, see, banks wouldn't loan to
Casinos.
They
Right.
wouldn't loan to mobsters.
Right.
But that's why the mobsters had
That's a strange thing. Why would they lend the mobsters, right?
Well, that's why the mobsters came in, because they had the money. They had the Teamsters pension fund,
Right.
and other things. Anyway, so what with Kirk and with Howard Hughes, you had people who didn't need the mob's money. They brought their own. They were their own banker.
Sure.
And so that changed the rules. That changed the tenor. It changed everything.
Well, I think to understand that what's even crazier is Bugsy Siegel.
Well,
And the fact that he was flying him back and forth to
Yeah.
Vegas, right? I wonder, did he fly him on that fateful last trip back?
Yeah.
He did, didn't he? Yeah.
He did. Kirk, Bugsy came in at the last minute and said, "I need a ride."
Right.
And this was in Los Angeles.
Right.
He needed to get over to Vegas for some meeting, and Kirk and his partner at the time, were going to toss, flip coins for who's going to fly Bugsy over. But Kirk did it. And I think he was trying to sell Bugsy a plane at the time. So this was an opportunity,
Right.
business opportunity. Anyway, he flew him over. It was like a 45-minute meeting, but Kirk never left the plane. Because this was just something Bugsy asked him to stay with the plane until because it would be short, and it was 45 minutes. Flew him home, flew him back to L.A., and that next day, Bugsy was gunned down in Beverly Hills.
Well, it's believable because in myself personally, I've done so many different things, started so many different companies. I can see how over time people start to think, well, how did you do all those things? But he did them one by one, right? I mean, he did them one by one. He was a boxer. He started flying and delivering aircraft, and eventually a freight lifting, a lot of freight. And
after the war, during the war, those deliveries he made to Scotland,
England, right?
Yeah, England, and delivered to a base in Scotland, that were used in to change the course of history, because this was essential to the Brits having air superiority over the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Was the fact that they were getting all these planes funneled over from North America.
Yeah, I think people to understand that back then, to get these planes delivered to Scotland, Kurt would fly them from the U.S. effectively.
Well,
right?
from Montreal.
From Montreal, would fly them over to deliver them to effectively the British to fight the war.
To the RAF, right.
And they did that because they wanted to avoid the Nazis or anything knowing what was happening. That's how they delivered. They didn't deliver them on boats. He actually flew them over one by one, basically.
They did. It was a group. The ferry command of the RAF had about 500 pilots at any one time, and they were constantly. They were in the air. I mean, Kirk was in the air every couple of days if he could, and he was paid $1,000 a flight.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that was
that good? I guess that was good money
spectacular money in
back then.
1942. And Kirk didn't even know how to fly until 1939. He took his first airplane ride in 1939 with a friend and fell in love with being in the air. Learned how to fly from Pancho. What's her name? The woman.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yep.
Happy Bottom Ranch up in the valley. Anyway,
did he have a connection to California City then? Was that where they had it was outside of Edwards Air Force Base? I thought that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
for sure.
Pancho.
There's a famous bar there, like Chuck Yeager and a bunch of people I met with too.
Yeah, that's where the they learned. I mean,
Yeah.
The early astronauts, but this was a place for people to learn how to be pilots. Just a pilot.
Right.
And Kirk talked his way in. And he milked cows and shoveled manure in order to get be able to attend, because he didn't have money. And so he got his first job out of that, which was training pilots for defense contractors up in King City and out in Blythe. So he was a pilot trainer within weeks or months of learning how to fly.
Well, yeah, he wanted to do it. With passion, right?
Yeah.
So he figured out. I mean, that's an interesting lesson for people that are watching, is that he had no money. I mean, this guy had zero dough, right?
That's
and
right.
he made it happen anyways. He just figured out a way to make it happen.
He was installing furnaces for a living, and he picked up. When he got his first ride in an airplane, it was out of an airfield in Alhambra, where it cost him 50 cents to split the rental for 15 minutes in the air. But it changed his life. Until then, he was a boxer. And that was what he did on the side.
Rifle Right, right?
Well, that's Rifle Right Kerkorian was awarded to him after some fight when he was 20 years old, 19 or 20.
Right.
And it was his dying day. It probably was the most precious possession, was his nickname, Rifle Right.
Right.
But he was a very good boxer, because he didn't go down.
Yeah, it's funny about this. As I talk about this book, there is so much to unpack here, right? About Cary Grant, the facility he bought up in Reno as a testing, a sort of a training facility that was an old Sinatra casino, where Sinatra had to give up that license, where what happened during the MGM fire that was remarkable, the insurance lawsuit in which he ended up settling. It's just the most remarkable thing. I got to say, it's up there with one of the most remarkable business books I've ever read in my whole life. I've been doing this for 33 years on Wall Street. I'm going to give these out as gifts for people that know me. I was, a couple years ago, compelled to call you. I got a hold of you on Facebook and said, this is like one of the most important books ever written. And I just continue to think to this day that there are so many lessons about not having money and persevering. The setbacks he had after he bought the Flamingo and they wouldn't let him finance, and he really lost a lot on the international. Kind of Baron Hilton, or I don't know if it was Conrad or Baron, but one of them Baron kind of shoved it up his ass a little bit, and
took advantage.
And Kirk took advantage. He took advantage of Kurt when he was down a little bit. But the guy persevered. He said, lesson learned. No sour grapes. Let's move on. Right.
Right.
Yeah. I can't remember what the name of that was up there in Reno. It was right. It was on the Tahoe border.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it
was Calneva. It was
Calneva Lodge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Calneva Lodge. That's right.
Yeah. Sinatra's, the state licensing board took offense at some of Frank's friends.
How did Kurt overcome the drama with the bet where the guy was like a mobster and he made a bet and wrote the check? Did it end up being a big deal, or because I know he was embarrassed about it, but he was severely embarrassed about it. But what happened?
It's the reason that that Baron Hilton got a better deal on the first hotel,
right?
Because what happened is back in the '60s, early '60s, Kirk was doing a lot of betting on sports, and there was some big boxing match that I don't remember,
right?
But a big boxing match that he bet on, and frankly, when I see the accounts of it, it looks like maybe there was it was a split decision. Let me put it this way. And the guy that won looked a lot worse than the guy that lost. But Kirk had bet on the guy that lost, and he suddenly owed his bookie $21,300, something like that.
And he wrote a check to someone.
Well, yeah, the someone with the bookie went by his code name was George Raft.
Right.
He wasn't George Raft, but the actor, but he used that name. So he called and let Kirk know that he should write this check to
George
Raft, and Kirk did that and flew it to New York.
It was delivered to a hotel.
Yeah, but here's the thing: the guy that he wrote he was dealing with was at the very moment being wiretapped by the FBI.
Right.
So there's Kirk saying, you know, he had no problem writing the check. He owed the money. It was a bet. It was legit.
And he was a man of his word.
Man of his word. He was going to pay it.
Right.
But everybody knew that the feds were were investigating a lot of these characters in his life, and he just didn't want to call attention to it. So he was trying to pay the bill without turning it into a scandal, and it wasn't in 1963 or whatever it was. What happened was that when Kirk started the International Hotel with enough money to get it launched, he did not have the funds to finish it. It's one of those typical. He needed to do a public offering to finance it, to finish the financing. And when that came up, it happened to coincide with publicity on these mobsters. And
well, he brought it public. It went public. He wanted to do a secondary to pay it off.
Yes,
right. I think for people who are not familiar with this, the International Hotel, which later became the Hilton and then now is Westgate, was it's connected to the Las Vegas Convention Center. It is at the time was the biggest hotel in the world, right? And it is still a behemoth of a hotel. And what was famous was Kurt brought Elvis Presley there, right?
Yes,
it was competing with it was Howard Hughes was opening the Frontier,
the Landmark.
Then it was and this was a dominant, just incredible hotel that he built, and there's a lot in the story about how he built the hotel, the competition with Howard Hughes, what was happening with Baron Hilton. Was it Baron or Conrad?
I think it's Baron, but I
can't remember. And what transpired with this and how Kurt had adversity, overcame it. Almost like you could be a bitter person. If you were Kurt, you could be bitter over that, right?
He was angry, I have to say.
Right.
By all accounts.
Right.
All accounts. But it made him, I mean, he was forced to do things that he didn't want to do.
Sure.
And that always bothered Kurt.
Right.
So, but what he didn't like was the implication that he was in business with the mob. He wasn't.
Right.
It was a sports bet, and he had nothing to do with mobsters, except as occasionally they were his friends.
Well, I think that he still, that was something he had to overcome too. But I think a lot of relationships came forward and said, "We've looked at Kurt. This is not true.
Exactly,
this is legitimately not true."
He was not, by anybody's definition, in bed with any mobsters at any time. But as a businessman, he didn't need them. He just flat out didn't need that source of income. So anyway, but what happened here is that the government, the SEC, wanted Kirk to turn over information about the flamingo.
But it was really kind of the IRS that was pressuring him, and they pressured the SEC to ask him for that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a bad tactic, right? They really held him up.
Exactly. And they did it at a key time. So he had to come up with different funding. So we had to work a deal with his partner.
But where he really got kind of screwed there, and I think he really did, was he bought the Flamingo, which was an historically, started by Bugsy, and the mob was skimming there. Everyone kind of knows this. He started reporting it legitimately. So the IRS is like, wow, they're reporting so much new income.
Yes.
And how could someone be ballsy enough to buy the Flamingo and not have the books? And he's like, I didn't want the books. I just wanted to buy the casino. He made it legitimate, and they were penalizing someone that made it legitimate.
Yeah, well, they couldn't believe that somebody would buy it without doing a due diligence.
Right.
Again. And Kirk did not do a due diligence.
No.
He saw what they made. I mean, he saw what the action was. He knew what he could do with it. And he knew he was going to be building the International, and he wanted a hotel where he could train staff
Right.
on a big scale, because the biggest hotel in the world was going to be a challenge to staff. And so the Flamingo was his training ground for the big hotel.
What's amazing here is, by the way, I started being a pilot when I was 13. They're going to tell you a lot. Like, this is a lot for me. Like, this is such an important thing. But what's crazy about this is, I'm going to blow your mind. I think I'll blow your mind.
Okay.
I worked with Freddie Sarno,
Oh, really?
Jay Sarno's son.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I don't think people realize that Caesar's Palace, the land under Caesar's Palace, was owned by Kirk Kerkorian.
Yeah,
and
was.
the great Jay Sarno came and said, Kurt, I need that land.
Yes.
This is crazy.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Kirk bought that land after he made his first million.
Oh, really?
It was when, and the first million was made when Studebaker, of all companies,
Yep.
bought out his young small charter airline.
Right.
They wanted to branch out and save their automobile business by expanding, and so Kirk agreed, because he was left in charge of running it, and they gave him $1 million just to keep running it the way he had been. He took that $1 million. He went to Vegas and paid $940,000 of it
For the land.
for that land, and it was terrible land. I mean, it was on the Strip, but all the frontage property wasn't fronting on all the stuff that fronted on the Strip was owned by individuals, and so he had to work a deal where he acquired all that frontage to make the 40 acres worth a place for a big casino and hotel. And so he did that, and then Sarno comes to town. It's almost like it happened in Bing Bang, but it.
But he also eventually he owned other property there, though, right? Because he owned where I think the Oasis was. I mean, a couple other.
He owned a big chunk I mean, it was a big piece of land that didn't front on the Strip, but it did by the time it closed escrow, because he made trades. He traded 5 acres over there for a half an acre over here that was worthless otherwise. I mean, you couldn't even have built a gas station on it. I mean, it was nothing. But he saw the potential, and he worked it, and he turned it into much more valuable property. So it just happened to be exactly what Sarno wanted.
Wow.
And it was Caesar's.
Yeah, he did a lot of those deals.
Yeah.
A lot of those deals. What's your, I mean, I want to continue to go over it, but what's your favorite part of the whole book?
Oh, geez. That's like asking, who's your favorite kid?
Right.
It's they all have things that have value. And I mean, I love the history of his air exploits. As a young pilot, flying skies that are so dangerous that hundreds of his colleagues died in the process.
Right.
And the worst plane to fly in that period over the North Atlantic in the winter was something called the Mosquito. It was literally a wooden plane, and it was subject to icing. But it was a beautiful plane, and it was the fastest, most maneuverable. Kirk loved it because it was fast. Kirk loved it because you could do things.
Is that the one where you almost ran out of gas?
Yes, he decided to try to set the record for getting from Gander or whichever place he took up to Prestwick, and it was, if you could do it, and only way to well, let's back up. This plane had a range of about 1,500 miles, and that flight was something more like 2,500 miles. It was like 1,000 miles beyond its range. But if you got a nice tailwind, which they called the Hurricane Express,
Right.
You get up there, you get into, and now there's nobody's running that hurricane. That it's in charge of some creature in the heavens. So he had done a couple trips where he set a record. He'd set one. But it was then one of his colleagues beat him by a few minutes. But on this particular case, they were halfway to Scotland and it stopped. The wind stopped, which meant that he couldn't, it was going to be touch and go. They'd passed the point of no return.
So because on the way to Scotland, he could have stopped off and got gas somewhere.
If he could have, he would have, but he couldn't because he's over the Atlantic.
Right.
And in the way you'd usually make this trip would be hopping from port to you go to Newfoundland, you go to Iceland, and then you cross someplace where you got about a 500-mile flight instead of the 2,500. And so the spot he was in is he had gambled on the wind,
right,
and the wind stopped.
Oh God!
So he's changing all the settings. He's going to nurse this plane the rest of the way to Scotland, and they get somewhere near Scotland, and where he has radio contact, and they say, well, we've got low ceiling, bad visibility, fog, and so he's going to be. It's night. He's been coming in at night in fog and
no
drizzle,
visibility.
No visibility, and no gas. So he actually made the decision to abandon ship,
to ditch.
Yeah, he kicked open the hole in the bottom of the cockpit and told his navigator, jump, and he'd be right behind him. And the navigator was so distraught. A young kid,
because it was water, right?
It's water, and it's
winter.
We're
going to be dead.
We'll be dead in 5 minutes,
right.
10 minutes, whatever. It's icy Atlantic, and the kid was literally in tears. Said, "Please, we'll be dead. Mm-hmm. Let's try." And so Kirk wouldn't have tried because it's a bad risk. Mm-hmm. But with this kid's permission, he went. He went in. He's nursing it. He's expecting the plane to die at any minute because the gas gauge is literally, it's pinned on empty. And so he's coming in the dark, into the fog, and no gas. And when they clear the fog, they're right there. And so he lands, and then he realized his legs were shaking so much that he couldn't maneuver the plane. Once it came to a stop by gravity, and his legs were shaking. He was just shot, and they sat there for about 10 minutes, and then he drives it over to the parking area, and it died before he pulled. I mean, before he turned it off, it turned itself off. So he was minutes from disaster.
Wasn't he buying surplus planes or something like that?
Well, when the war was over and it was no longer making those crossings in the North Atlantic, he realized that airplanes that were surplus to the military now could be purchased for nothing comparatively, and then sold to new airlines.
He could redo them and stuff.
They become cargo planes for lots of people, lots of companies all over North and South America. Mm-hmm. So he purchased one of his, and he had started a little charter out of Montebello, and this is where he started coming to Las Vegas, for instance, bringing customers or people that would charter him for a ride over.
Right.
But in Hawaii, there were 6 or 7 of these essentially military versions of a DC-3, 2-engine props, and they had been taken to Hawaii on ships,
Right.
but because they had the capacity, they had the fuel capacity to go from island to island, but not to the mainland.
Right.
Without, so they put extra fuel tanks, and even then you had to be careful.
Right.
So he
it was like a flying gas can is what it was when you filled it up.
Well,
right.
there's a gas tank right behind you now.
Right.
It's under you, it's in your wings, and there's the one spare
Right.
sitting right behind your back. And Kirk filled it himself because his life depended on having a full tank.
Right.
Problem is, if I can explain it, is DC-3 sits on its tail,
Right.
and so it's at
It's a tail dragger. Yeah.
so it's on, and its first fuselage is at an angle, downward angle, and when that gas tank that's been put on the backs behind in the cargo area, that gas tank, because it's at an angle, when you fill it with fuel, it won't fill with it starts to run out of the cap. Because it's at an angle,
Right. So you can't. It's got to be flat.
It's
for you
got
to
to
fill
be
it
flat.
up.
So
yeah.
when you're up in the air, it's flying flat. You see, oh my goodness, I didn't fill it up, but they'd filled it as far as they could. So
it would have been better if they would have lifted the tail up.
It would have been
then put
much
the tail
better
back down.
because what happened is Kirk is on this particular flight. Everybody's asleep, and he kicks back, puts it on autopilot, and dozes off himself. But as I say in the story, it was the silence that woke him up. All of a sudden, he woke up because there wasn't any engine running.
Oh wow!
So you're out there in the middle of the Pacific,
and all of a sudden it's quiet.
It's quiet. Now, restarting a plane in flight after the tank has gone dry is tough because you get airlocks. If it had just switched over it would have been fine, but this didn't. It switched off. It didn't switch over, and so he's descending, and through the clouds and through some thunderstorms, and his navigator sends out an SOS.
Yeah, I mean, they got that back on the mainland, actually.
They did.
Yeah.
And it was making radio headlines
right.
at the time. Aviators lost in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah.
And then he's has to get it started, and he's descended from 11,000 feet down to 4,000 feet before he gets it started again.
Which, by the way, over the ocean is nothing. It's not even a mile.
No.
I mean, you can see the waves.
Yeah. It was in the middle of the night, so
which is worse to me.
Oh yes, less visibility.
Yeah, no one's going to find you.
Not a chance. Not a chance.
I mean, you're dead, man.
And the Coast Guard was notified. It'll take us 4 days to get there,
right,
or whatever, because it was so far out. So it was no point in even dispatching a crew.
But he got it restarted because he had fuel tanks in the back, and
they did have fuel tanks. They had the fuel. It just that at that point they didn't expect the first tank to go dry, and therefore they hadn't switched.
Oh, right.
And so when they didn't kick it over and keep it running,
right,
they had to face the possibility of airlocks. And so the suspense was quite severe. So
I'm sure it was.
And they had to make up for the fact that they don't have as much fuel as they thought they had to get them all the way to San Francisco. So they started throwing things out. They're throwing out wrenches. They're throwing out toolkits of all kinds. They're throwing out.
Imagine if you're in the ocean, like on a ship, and they're throwing shit out of a plane.
Well, and Kirk, he's big on having a plan B for all of his adventures. There was a big yellow inflatable raft back there that he said, just don't throw that out. We may need it.
Yeah, don't throw the raft out.
Exactly,
we might need that raft.
Exactly, because they're thinking, at worst comes to worst, we're going to be
hit
ditching.
The water.
We're going to ditch at some point because we may not get to San Francisco with what we've got left in our tank.
Right.
So that's
how did he make the transition to Vegas? Like he was in Fresno.
Well, he was born in Fresno.
Right. But how did he make the transition to Vegas? Like, what was the first emphasis? Was it the flying people here? Was it the gambling? What brought him to Vegas in the first place?
Yeah, it was the gambling and the plane. I mean, he started coming to Vegas with a fellow who was a scrap metal a collector. He turned scrap into recycled scrap, and so he's a big deal scrap collector. In the aftermath of the war, when there was a lot of big boom in because metals had been such a rarity,
right?
But anyway, yes, he started bringing this guy over because he was a big gambler. Kirk called him he's a great businessman. He said, I couldn't call him a great gambler. He said, but everybody loses in gambling. So, but this guy loved to do it. And Kirk got hooked on the risk and the game and so that was a big part of it. And then he got to be friends with people over here, and he started getting a business for his charter service to actually collect customers for specific casinos as well. So it was all in the aftermath of the war, and in the.
What really made him money though? Because I know that when he owned MGM, I mean, by then you have to have some money to buy something like MGM.
Yeah, that came later. In the early '60s, Kirk made his first investment. He really wanted to be in the gaming business, and the Dunes was new and in trouble, and he.
Didn't he lose though there?
Oh, he did.
He lost, right?
But he he was willing to do $150,000, but the state of Nevada only limited him to 51% for 50, and he lost it almost instantly. So he was feeling like he was lucky that he didn't lose 150. But he took it as a lesson. He said after that he didn't want to have any investments in anything that he didn't control.
Right.
Exactly. And so for him, that was a $50,000 lesson.
Right.
But after that, the investment he made with buying that piece of land that turned out to be Caesar's, that was the game changer. Because when Sarno took that one on, it guaranteed Kirk something like $3 million a year. I mean, it was.
They paid him rent, right?
They paid him rent and a percentage
of the Caesars.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was smart.
Yeah, but what worried him is he might have to run the place because it was Kirk and the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund that were funding Sarno, and then the mobsters had a mobster. It was his. The gaming floor manager, the pit boss. Right.
Well, didn't they kind of like Jay Sarno have to install some people that were mobsters to run it or whatever?
That's what happened.
But Kurt always got paid?
Kurt always got paid. Kirk, once the mobsters were making news, Kirk moved out of he had an office in Caesars. He left that, and just to get some separation. Because he didn't approve of it, but he didn't have any say about that.
Right.
All he was the landlord.
He was the owner of the land.
Yeah.
Right.
He was the landlord.
So I just is irrelevant to this point, but what ended up happening with that? Because, I mean, obviously, how long did he stay the landlord before he sold his position?
I'd have to go back and look at my own book. It was a while. Because
I don't know that it was in the book, was it? What he actually did with Caesars?
Well, he turned it into money. I mean, into value, into power. He got
sold the lease or something.
He went Circus. He had a piece of that.
Yeah, that's right.
He got his brother into. I mean, it was.
Well, that's one thing. That's a good transition. One thing about his sister and his brother. Kurt was very loyal to his family. Right? Oh. His brother owned like a sandwich shop or some sort, right?
Kirk gave him something called it was a nightclub.
Yeah,
it was And Nish, his name, he was a boxer before Kirk
Right.
was, and had his brains scrambled.
But isn't it still here, Nish's place?
I'm not sure.
No, but isn't it behind Bally somewhere over on behind the Flamingo? There's a little place there. Wasn't that Nish's place? I know that he had a restaurant, right?
Yeah, it was a restaurant, nightclub, and Nish was a gambler too, and not as good at it as Kirk, and not as careful about it. So Nish was constantly having to sell points in his restaurant and nightclub. Kirk gave it to him free, lock, stock, and liquor. And but Nish over time had to. He didn't want to keep going back to his brother.
Right. Well, his brother was a gambler. Obviously, you talk about him being with the Lowe's family, people he was friends with over there, and that sort of $1 million chip. Right?
Oh, isn't that a fun one?
That's a great story.
Good story.
That's a great story.
Yeah, and that's a story that one of those stories that I got toward the end.
Oh, really?
What's his name?
I mean, I'm sure there were some people that were instrumental in helping you write the book. Like, who was the most instrumental, or can you tell us who was the most instrumental?
Well, Terry Christensen was huge.
Oh, Terry cooperated.
He did.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now, I can't remember. It was Terry
from the beginning.
Oh, from the beginning.
Yeah.
Did Terry end up, because of the Anthony Pelicano thing, going to jail?
Yes, he did.
Really, he kind of got screwed there, didn't he?
Absolutely.
They really kind of
used him.
Treated Terry. When you say they used him, who used him?
The government.
Because I think Kurt was pretty viciously loyal to Terry Christensen. Wasn't he a big fan?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, I think it hurt Kirk a ton that happened to Terry. But Terry was he really was a son to Kirk. I mean, it's just.
So I can't recall all the characters, but I know who Terry Christensen is. Was he the Marine?
Yes.
So he was the Marine, right? And
yes.
He was Kurt's lawyer. He worked at the Bowser law firm. Is
yes,
that right?
That's right.
And then he ended up ultimately coming to work for Kurt, did he not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it had a pretty pivotal role there.
He was more than a lawyer. He was a confidant. He was.
Is Terry still around?
He is.
How old is Terry now?
He's older than I am. He's older than I am.
He's older than you.
Yeah.
Oh boy! Wow. I know he was involved in a big way.
Oh yeah. No, he's after.
That was the whole Stephen Bing thing, right?
Well, yeah. Well,
the Pelicano thing was the Bing thing, right?
Yeah. Well, Bing. Yeah.
Why was Patty Glazer? I get Kurt's a quiet man. I remember the flash mob thing, and I know he was like, oh my God, mortified,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But why do they not want the story to be told about, how Penniless Dropout, Kirk Kerkorian became the greatest deal maker in capitalist history? Why do they not want that story told?
Well, they didn't hire me.
I understand, but they haven't hired anybody.
Well, I know. But
and why does Linda or Tracy not want it told?
I don't know.
Their dad had like a monumental effect on people's lives.
Yes.
We already know that Andre Agassi was named, Andre Kurt Agassi.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
We know this is a guy story that needs to be told. If more people did business with the way Kirk Kerkorian did.
Yes.
I mean, I'm fiercely loyal to the people that are loyal to me. And I have people all the time saying, you should get rid of that guy. This guy is a screw up, but he's done. There are certain people here that have done things for me when I was down and out, and I'm fiercely loyal to him. And I so resonate with this book. I cannot tell you.
Those people, those same people, the ones that were fiercely loyal to Kirk, they all wanted that story told. I mean, the ones that were, how can I put this? Because I don't want to denigrate anybody who didn't help me, but so many of them didn't have anything to gain by helping me, and they did because they wanted Kirk's story told. Right. And I was doing it, and the fact that I'm an independent writer, I'm a journalist. I'm not. This isn't an authorized biography.
Right. But he would never have authorized anyone.
No, he wouldn't have. Although the one book that was done about him before, back in the 70s, by an LA Times reporter, by the way, he cooperated unofficially, and you can tell he's even quoted, but not by name. I mean, I know, but as a journalist, I know that had to come from the man himself,
right?
Just based on what kind of insight it had.
Sure.
So I know that he did cooperate, but he didn't want to do it officially. But I had wives, girlfriends, business partners. I name a bunch of them in the thanks, because they were so important,
right,
to being able to tell that story with authenticity and accuracy.
When did Scotia die?
When was that?
You know what's funny about that is that like how a guy could just get a dog, but he had to have that dog, right? And had to have the house ready for Scotia, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I something that I understand it.
Do you?
Yeah.
How do you remember? Do you know how young the dog was at the time?
I don't remember. Is it in the book?
Well, I don't know how young it was when he got Scotia, right? Because it's really the travel agent guy who had Scotia, and then he wanted it and negotiated a trip to California and all this stuff to get the dog over there.
It was in Hawaii, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It was like Charles' place or something, right?
Yes.
He leased out Charles'
that's
place.
Right. That's right. That dog just won his heart. So whatever age it was,
right?
But yeah, and then like once you're in love with a pet, it's you're all in, and he was.
I was. It's funny. Some things that have affected me. I'm always generous to valets and waiters and waitresses, and in this town, they remember you for doing that. But Kurt was notoriously generous, right?
Yeah.
But the part that I love, the best part of this part about being generous was that he applied for credit cards as one of the richest guys in America.
Yeah.
And they rejected him.
Yeah.
Kirk Kerkorian didn't have any credit.
Did not have credit. People that he was, who were working for him had credit.
Sure.
They could get a credit card, but Kirk actually applied for a Diners Club or Amex, and was rejected when he was a multimillionaire.
Right, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One of my favorite stories was on the generosities part is the story of he was in New York and was racing to LaGuardia for his plane when he realized he'd forgotten to tip the maids back at the Pierre Hotel, and he ordered the driver. I think this was Yamanigian. Ordered him, turn around. I got to go back. And he went back into the city in order to leave a tip for the maids at the hotel. Now,
how did he meet Alex, by the way? Do you know how Alex came to work for him or not?
Well,
I mean, you wouldn't. I know that a lot of questions I'm having for you. Like to be fair to you, you will.
I need to read my book.
No, to be fair to you, like you won't be able to leave. I mean, we're having dinner tonight, but like to be fair, like this is. There were so many great things in here about Lee Iacocca.
Yeah.
And Lisa Bonder, and sort of some personal relationships he had, the loyalty from Bank of America, the special dividend that was paid out, all the things that are amazing about this. And you were able to chronicle them. I'm just curious as to how did you gather it all? Because it's really like Kurt is a private guy, so you was a private guy, so you had to figure out how to like do this in some sort of chronological order. How'd you do that?
Well, eventually I drafted for myself a timeline of Kirk's life that ran over 100 pages, just little lines of
everything he did, right?
Yeah, of just in outline form,
right?
And it was and that timeline gave me a sense of what was at stake at the time. So that when things were going well, what was going on in the background, and when things started to go sideways, what was going on in the background. So the timeline was a huge asset to understand the dynamic of a moment, because it's more than just this happened. What were the motivations? What were the risks? What were the all that stuff had to be part of the story. and to do that, I needed people with great memories and heart who could tell me about the emotional aspect of it as well as the facts of it. And it gave me a chance to verify things, so that if I'm getting one version one place, I get a similar one somewhere else, and it helps to make it more credible, and it gives you a chance to get different sort of slices of the emotion that might be in play. Hearing it from a business person, CEO, or a lawyer, or the kid that gave him was his guru in the gym. I mean, Ron Falahi was.
Yeah. Is Ron Falahi still around?
Yeah, he is. He's. I think he just turned 80.
Really?
But yeah, he looks 40.
He's the workout guy, right?
Oh, he's wonderful.
He's like they called him his valet, right? Back then they were called the valet.
He was his steward on the plane, his steward on the yacht, his cook in the house, he provided all of his athletic training, and carried his weights, carried Kirk's weights along on the trips. I mean, he saw Kirk as a human being in a way that almost nobody else did.
Sure.
Even as wives and girlfriends, Ron was special, and so his cooperation, his help, his insights are enormously valuable in the story, in telling Kirk's story.
Yeah. Wow. One of my many favorite parts, which people probably don't realize, that you put in the book that I never even knew, was that he owned MGM Film Studios, the sort of grand, a third of all movies ever made or something, really incredible, right? And he decided to bring Leo the Lion to Vegas Strip, right? Which was controversial at the time, right? He was going to make the MGM, but it was brilliant. Was it? It was brilliant, and basically the MGM made more money effectively than MGM ever made, right? In terms of a film studio.
Yes.
Right. And then ultimately he separated MGM, the gaming company, from MGM, the movie studio. So how did you find out about that? And what was like, I mean, I guess walking people through this is that he made a decision to transition into two public companies and create, I mean, he took MGM and created MGM, the gaming company.
Right.
And you spoke to everyone about that. What was the feedback on when that decision was made?
Well, his belief in the logo, the lion, the MGM,
Leo the Lion, right?
Yeah. But the fact that MGM was such a classy outfit to him, it was if you could wear that symbol on your jacket, you know, it says something about you. It reflects well on you in business as well as in films, and so he just spread it around. The people that helped me on that are probably in the footnotes, because I was very grateful for that stuff.
Yeah, but people don't realize is like Siegfried and Roy, the Tiger Act.
All
these people owe their start to Kirk Kerkorian.
They certainly owe their stardom. Yes,
right. Their stardom. Right.
Yeah. And he said, just you work for the best. You know, you
just keep polishing those
MGM, polish
those three letters.
The three letters. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So when you're writing the book, more people are cooperating. Did you get any grief about making it any further from Patty Glaser, or from that point on did you not get any grief about it?
She wasn't overtly unhelpful at all. And the fact is there were some people who were reluctant. There's always reluctance,
for sure.
And I was patient with them as much as I could be. I had a deadline, but what I thought was going to be a year took 2, and then it took a year to write it. So it doesn't happen. Writing is not a speed sport.
What didn't make the book? I mean, there's so much he's done. I mean, we didn't cover even in this interview, right? With that takeover of Chrysler, the different investing he was doing, including Chrysler, the Bear Stearns story, which you know, obviously Alex portrays in there about, you know, you're dead to us, basically, kind of thing. You don't tell Babe Ruth how to hold the bat, kind of thing. These are this book is just full of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, tons of stuff is incredible in there.
Yeah.
But what didn't get in the book?
Well, there's a story I heard after I was done, after the book came out, after the paperback even came out. It was just too late. But I love it, and I tell the story. Robert Papazian, who is another Armenian family, his father was a friend of Kirk's, and they were neighbors. And Kirk, he was one of the guys that would come over. The father would come over to Kirk's place on football day, and, you know, bet on the games, and back when Robert when he was a kid of 10 or 11 years old, he was invited to come along with Kirk and his father on a gambling trip to Vegas, just a quick one, because they weren't going to stay. Just come on over, and Kirk flew. Kirk was the pilot. He flew his own plane. Oh, wow. Yeah. And so they come over, and there may be somebody else in this trip, but the Papazians, the dad goes off to gambling. The kid just has, you know, just has an adventure in Las Vegas. He's too young to be in the casinos. That's how he's a kid. But he remembered that Kirk had a valise, or a briefcase of some kind that he brought with him, and it turned out it had $50,000 in it, cash. And Kirk went off to the gamble, and they met back at the plane at the appointed hour, maybe 2-3 hours later. And Robert remembers that they took off. Kirk didn't have the briefcase anymore, where if he did, it was empty. And they took off. Kirk gets up to cruising altitude and immediately puts the plane in a dive. And they're looking around, what's going on here? But they're diving for the longest time if you're in the back seat. and then he pulls it up and he says, "Whew, I needed to get that out of my system." So this is the guy, Kirk, the guy that you can never tell if he's winning or losing. Right. He had just lost that 50,000 and he was feeling it. So, really? So the Papazians were witnesses that he sometimes showed his feelings.
Once in a while.
If you lose 50 grand just in 2 hours.
Did you get a sense on, I want to talk business, so I don't really want to talk about Lisa Bonder, but did you get a sense about the Western, I guess I'm almost lost with how much stuff is in here, right? I mean, just really amazing stuff, right? You know, he tried to take over Chrysler. Yes. And ultimately made a lot of money with Chrysler, right?
Yeah, he failed and made something like
a couple billion, right?
Couple billion,
right?
Yeah.
Right. But did you get a sense that like what possessed him that suddenly he was a guy who could, you know, he bought, you know, a big stake control of Western Airlines. He tried to buy Columbia Pictures. He actually owned a big portion of Columbia Pictures.
Well, if you go back to that period, we're talking the late 60s, mid-late 60s. Right. He tried to buy the automobile company, Chrysler. He bought Western. He had a big chunk of it, and he bid on MGM. Right. What's common about those three? They're all about leisure. Whether it's driving,
consumer brands, basically.
Yeah. Well, he called it. He said, no, this is. He put all of those together in something he called the leisure industry. It was Kirk's invention. It was Kirk's idea that that with the economy that was coming out of the 60s was going to be, people had time, people had money, people wanted entertainment. They had film, drive, travel, see the world, catch a plane, go somewhere, have vacations, and Las Vegas.
Did he actually ever have a direct relationship with Howard Hughes? Like, did they spend any time together, or was it just they were rivals in the same city?
Oh, Kirk was a big fan of Howard Hughes before.
He's an aircraft guy.
Right? Yeah, he considered he'd seen Howard Hughes get off a plane once with a newspaper under his arm and his flight jacket and his hat, and he thought, wow, that guy looks like a pilot. That's right. It was like that's my image.
Right.
And but he thought Kirk had this period when he was buying junk planes and fixing them. Well, one of the things he did, and this is in the early 50s, he bought a Constellation, the old yeah. And so he bought one that crashed in England and wasn't demolished. It was a kind of a bad landing,
right?
And it needed a new left wing and a new nose cone. But he bought it from the insurance company. They totaled the plane, and he bought it for $150,000 instead of the usual $750,000. So, and so he thought,
it's weird to me, you can just buy a plane, put a new wing on it, but okay.
Well, so what he thought was, I'll keep that and I'll find some parts to replace the one. Well, what happened was that Air France had a similar problem where one of their Connies had a hard landing, and it had a intact left wing. Or lost the opposite. It was the other wing. Yeah. And it had an intact nose cone. So he bought that one, and he had both planes shipped to Bayonne, New Jersey, where they set up a dock where they called Splinterville, and they put them. And Lockheed actually set up a temporary factory site there because they wanted to put those back together as one plane. To all the specs of they wanted of the corporation of the fine. Anyway, it was.
Well, it's Howard Hughes who bought the Connies initially.
Well, right? He was the father of them. He designed them after a fashion. So Kirk wanted to sell the Connie that he just salvaged to Howard Hughes, and had meetings with him in Vegas. They would meet at the Thunderbird, but in the end, Kirk couldn't. Howard Hughes he complained about the size of the the toilets or the lavatories on the plane. He thought they were not and so Kirk's thinking of grand ideas. Howard was down in the weeds. In the weeds,
right?
And it never came together. But they were completely friendly. He liked them.
But it turns out that Howard Hughes kind of had it out for Kirk, though, right? I mean,
well, that's before
in your book you kind of outline that after Howard Hughes is gone, the guy who was his right hand man came to Kirk and said, "Here's all the notes." And basically,
Well, when Kirk was building the biggest hotel in the world, Howard Hughes was buying the Desert Inn and several others. And so Howard was buying into existing hotels and casinos. Kirk was making
a new one.
Right. And so Kirk's the builder. Howard's the acquirer.
Sure.
And Howard didn't.
But Kurt's the builder of the hotels.
Yes.
But of the acquirer of other assets like MGM.
Yes.
I mean,
it's right. And so what you had though was and Kirk was in the movie business like Howard had been in the movie business.
Right.
So there was a lot of similarity to their paths, but Kirk loved competition. He wanted competition. Howard wanted monopoly.
Yeah, he wanted dominance.
He wanted to dominate. Las Vegas isn't big enough for two kings of the gaming world. So Howard was working behind the scenes to
undermine
him.
Right.
He offered to buy him out too. I mean, Kirk didn't even consider any of those offers, but they were made. So they were rivals, but only once one felt like a rival.
Sure. Kurt wasn't a rival to him.
No.
But Howard saw Kurt as a rival.
Exactly.
Right.
And once Howard went over the edge emotionally and mentally, Kirk just shook his head. He had such respect for him.
Right.
As a planner, a builder,
sure.
a designer. But
how big of a deal was it when he did this Elvis thing? I mean, in the book, it outlines that, but like, is there a way to like with how big entertainment is today to realize how big of a deal it was for Elvis to come perform and how that changed the landscape? Because he paid Elvis a lot of money. He did.
But even Elvis's guy, his agent, was reluctant to make too big a deal of it because Elvis had been out of the performing business and in movies he'd been doing films,
Hawaiian
but
stuff,
some of the worst movies ever
made.
But he was had been off the concert circuit, and he wasn't sure how popular Elvis would be, and that's his own guy, and Kirk flipped a coin essentially about who do I open with,
Barbra Streisand
or Elvis, and they went with Barbara because that was right after Funny Girl on Broadway. So
he went with Barbara again later too with the next MGM, right?
Barbara was great, and they had a great relationship.
Did you get a chance to talk to Barbara about it?
No, I'd still like to do it. But so if you see her, yeah.
Is she still with James with James Brolin?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Anyway, I guess we'll have to ask, right? I don't suspect Barbara will be giving interviews anytime soon, but okay.
Yeah. But for the next edition,
sure.
But the thing about Kirk that I think is important. This is a good context for it. Kirk's. One of his CEOs said to think about it. The reason Kirk was everybody who worked for him was loyal to Kirk.
Very loyal.
Kirk didn't demand loyalty; he inspired it. And the person, and I was told that this is in the book who said this story, but he said he was a CEO of one of the versions of the company, and said, "Thing about Kirk is." He took all the risk and gave everyone else the credit.
Right.
So, who wouldn't want to work for a guy like that?
Yeah.
So it's not like a Howard Hughes. It's not like almost any.
Not like me.
Yeah.
Although I give a lot of people credit.
Yeah.
Trust me on that. I do.
It takes a really big person, but what it instills is a ironclad loyalty that.
In the book, you describe the selling of the back lots of MGM and the sort of the garage sale that took place of MGM. It's rather negative. I mean, was it as negative as the book portrays? Because I mean,
it made
Dorothy's slippers.
It made Debbie Reynolds cry.
Right. Yeah. But reality was that was a waste of money.
Yes, it was.
I mean, it was like he was like being practical. In order to save the patient, you got to lose a little weight.
Well, it was a part of the movie industry that's no longer valid and no longer works. Everybody, even then, were starting to do their films are being shot on location. They're not shot in a back lot.
Right.
You had to have the reality of the real world.
Right.
And Kirk knew that sooner than Hollywood knew it.
Right.
And so Hollywood saw this as, oh my goodness, this is, pearl clutching time. He's changing the world. No, the world had changed, and they just didn't know it. That you don't keep right now. A lot of this stuff has now been installed in.
What's commonplace today?
Well, but what he was selling off is a lot of it has come back into the Motion Picture Academy Museum in L.A. They've recovered. Those kinds of things belong in museums, but they do not belong in your back lot because you're paying rent.
Yeah,
for
like
them.
the steam trains and stuff like that, and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, from the standpoint of sentimentality, it was brutal.
But he did some of the people who work for him did do some really stupid things. Like, I guess in retrospect, you didn't know that Jaws was going to be a big hit, did you? Yeah. I mean, no one had how can you get the shark to do those things, right?
Yeah, right.
But one of the questions I want to ask you is when you were investigating how Rain Man got made, how did Rain Man get made for $25 million and Kirk not know it? In the book, it suggests that the guy hid it from Kurt because it was kind of under the radar. Is $25 million under the radar for Kurt?
Well, that's
there was a movie being made for $25 million with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise.
I'm not sure how soon the $25 million was apparent.
It's just like slowly a slow burn or something.
Yeah, it's like an expense account. What it cost the LA Times for me to do some of my projects was mostly time, but eventually it hits the bottom line.
Right.
And so I'm sure that's what happened here to some degree. But this is when the guy he had, let's see, who was it? I'm blanking on all the characters. There was a director, and there was the guy running MGM at the time. There was a lot of support for this from people he trusted.
Right.
And Kirk's position was trust the people, trust your team.
Right.
And so he is not a guy. Kirk was not a guy to micromanage anything, but especially not things he didn't know much about. Did
you have fun making the book?
Did
you love it making the book?
I did. It was the people I met, the stories I heard. I knew it was a great story, and my only worry was that to just get out of the way and let it unfold, because it was just, you don't get stories like this every day.
Are you the only one that since the 70s that have written a book about Kirk Kerkorian?
There was a book written in the 70s about Kirk when he was. But
I mean, is there any other books that you know of?
No, I don't.
Why do you think that is? Like, how is it possible?
Well,
I mean, there's articles written about him.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, and in Vegas, obviously he's a legend. There's stuff named after him, but
yeah.
Why do you suppose there's been so few things written about him?
Well, when you have one that has all the stories in it, what else is left?
Well, I know, but even before that, even before he passed away.
Oh, and I know the fact that it hadn't been done. Well, the fact that my first call back from his side of the world was no, thank you, get lost, essentially. That is puts a damper on most reporters
because they don't want to fight that fight, right?
Yeah.
They want people that are going to cooperate.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, you want to find sources, and when they declare in advance that you're going to have actually opposition to it,
So how does Elizabeth Hurley and Lisa Bonder and Kirk Kerkorian and Anthony Pellicano all have something in common? I'm curious. When Steve Bing killed himself recently, were you surprised?
Well, yeah, I guess I was. Didn't know him. You
didn't get a chance to talk to Steve.
No, and again, all of his material came right out of the court records.
Right.
And you know, he was, and then the people that dealt with him, he was an interesting figure, but I never felt like he, Kirk didn't embrace him. He wasn't an enemy. He ended up getting, Kirk ended up helping Bing. But I don't know this part. Hold on a second. He sued Kirk for a couple billion for supposedly.
Steve Bing sued Kurt for a couple billion.
Yeah.
For what reason?
For going through his garbage.
Yeah, but he put that stuff in the public domain. Right.
Of course he did.
The garbage is public
Garbage-
domain.
garbage
Those of
doesn't
you
belong.
watching the show, if you don't be morons, if you put stuff in the garbage,
Yeah.
you don't have privilege. You don't have privacy. So
No,
don't burn your garbage then first, man. Whatever.
Yeah. Use a
That
shredder.
case didn't go
Yeah.
anywhere.
No, it didn't. But it was annoying. But it suggested that Kirk might have a grudge if he. But Kirk never carried a grudge
Right.
anywhere, anytime.
But
Not even-
Lisa Bonder's daughter, we know now, wasn't Kirk Kerkorian's daughter, right?
Correct.
Clear as day. There's no question about that.
Scientifically proven.
Right. And it was Steve Bing's daughter.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Do you think that in the book that she's portrayed accurately? I mean, it seems like to me.
Who, the daughter or the
No, Lisa.
Lisa?
It seems like to me, Lisa, it just really is apparent in the book, at least, that she. I mean, you actually listen to how much she provided her, and it's really quite sad, I guess.
Yeah.
Did you think it was a sad story, or did you
Oh
think
yeah,
it was
definitely a sad story, and sad on Kirk's part. He was mostly saddened by her. I mean, he was
he fond of the girl?
He was very fond. He loved her. That's why he kept coming back for more abuse.
He loved Lisa or the baby?
Both.
Oh, so he was fond of Lisa too.
Yeah.
But she couldn't keep her mouth shut, apparently, right? I mean, from what I read, she was a talker about everything, and everything that Kirk despised as being private, he wanted to be private.
Well,
she was trying to be public.
She put it in the public domain. She didn't just talk about it. She put it on the record in court. And that was where she crossed the line for Kirk. I mean,
right.
He had to fight back just for his rights, if nothing else. But that was, I mean, to me, that was Kirk's only regrets in life, I think, would be about his relationships with women.
But his first wife
Left him.
She left him?
Yeah. Divorced him.
But she didn't. But they stayed married for a long time, though.
No, actually, that was his second wife.
Oh, the first wife.
First wife, Peggy, who he met at the Palladium on a dance night.
Oh, yeah.
Just before the war. They got married in 1941, 42. After they got married after Pearl Harbor, because the world was going crazy.
Right.
So, and he was going off to be a flight instructor. And they were together for about 8 years, 8, 9, 10.
But they didn't have kids together.
They did not. They tried and it didn't work.
Right. But for that point being is that was a relationship of his, but not instrumental in his,
in who he
wealth
became.
building.
No, but it took him out of action for a while. He went into a deep depression. He even took electric shock treatments to get him out of it. Decided it wasn't worth it.
It's funny. My first wife left me, and I was very depressed. It was a terrible situation.
Yeah. That's
I know the feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was understandable that that was such a blow, and then he met Jean Hardy, who was a singer and dancer at the Thunderbird.
But she seemed to be very loyal to him even after they separated.
Yes.
She didn't want a divorce. They stayed together for a long time. And then she remarried pretty quickly after divorce. But it appeared to me that she was still loyal to him in some way because he took care of her.
Absolutely.
And she was not that kind of vindictive. It was a very healthy relationship even in divorce, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you had Tracy and Linda, right?
He had Tracy. Linda was adopted.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And they wanted to make sure that Tracy had a sibling.
Did I read in the book that he was he didn't think he was super fertile or something like that?
Yeah, he thought it
was all that flying probably and all that trauma.
Whatever.
Right.
He I don't think he was surprised. I think that Jean got pregnant the first time, but it wasn't going to happen again probably. And so they didn't.
Well, I didn't know, Linda, that you learn something new all the time. I don't think in the book you said she was adopted.
Yeah, but it's kind of a small matter. It's
right.
And
was she just a little baby?
And she was an infant. Yeah. And and Kirk, of course, he named his investment company Trescinda,
Right.
but it's
Takeoff of Linda and Tracy.
yeah,
Right.
and then Lindsay is Linda reverses it, and that becomes his philanthropy.
Oh, really?
Arm. So he was, they went on family vacations together with Cary Grant and his kids.
Right.
And,
They were all good friends.
yeah.
I know that the Armenian community, I mean, they kind of worshipped Kirk, right?
Oh,
I mean, he was.
Kirk was named the 15th after the 1988 earthquake that he responded with. He put together an airlift
Yeah.
that's on the order of the Berlin airlift.
Yeah, exactly.
Although he funded it,
Right.
but they named him one of their saints. I mean, he's one. I mean, he's like the 15th saint, and that goes back to the dawn of Christianity.
Right. Well, because there's an Armenian pope and stuff like that. Right?
Two of them.
Very similar to myself growing up Greek Orthodox.
Yes.
And so my only connection to Kurt, besides my massive admiration for him, and me setting up a company named after my kids, very similar, Micaiah, and the name of my kids and my wife, and all this other stuff, is he attended the Greek Orthodox church here because there was no Armenian church.
Oh, okay.
And that's how my aunt knew him.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Right.
Yeah. What's the name of the church?
Oh, I couldn't tell. I think it's in the book, actually.
Yeah, I think
I
it
actually
is.
think it's in the book because the gambler that died.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
This book is like amazing. It's astonishing. This
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
I can't express it. I can't express it. And I promised I'd get you back. And I don't know if we'll ever do an interview again. I hope we do.
No, sure.
We didn't cover the whole book.
No.
And not even close.
We're not even close. No.
What do you like? I mean, just before we leave, what are you doing now? Like this, I mean, to me, I can't understand why this isn't like the great. It's one of the best business books ever written. It's like a quasi autobiography, but business advice book at the same time. It is truly a masterpiece. The insight is incredible, and I'm going to do everything I can for everyone to be able to read this book. And I know it was a national bestseller, but it's just not. It's bigger than that.
I think it's worth everybody seeing. Yes, Kirk is the reason. It's not the writer. It's the story he lived.
Right. So
98 years he lived, by the way.
What are you doing next? Like, what are you doing? What are you working on?
I have some other book projects that are underway that I'll tell you about when they happen.
I hope so. I hope you'll come back. The question for me is, of all the books you've written, and this doesn't have to be your favorite, but I want to know. I know you've written a lot of books. What's your favorite thing you've written? By far, it doesn't matter what it is, because I know you have other books, and I'm gonna definitely on this podcast, we're gonna have your other books up with links to your stuff, so we're gonna have them all up there.
Well, my favorite piece of writing is a story that ran in the LA Times about 20 years ago, and it's the story of how my family came over from the old country in a boat with a bunch of Armenians and Greeks. And arrived with when my dad was an infant, but they came from Ukraine. In the last time there was a big war going on there.
Oh wow!
Or maybe the first time it was, back in the 20s. So what I did is I found the ship that they came over in, and I went back and found as many people who were the families of that specific bunch of immigrants. And so what I did was turn the old SS Washington, which was owned by a Greek shipping company, into a sort of a test tube of what happened to one batch of immigrants that came over. And it coincided with the crackdown in the 20s of 1920s against immigrants. After World War I, there was quite a backlash of anti-immigrant sentiment in the country, which we've had since.
Where can they find the story? Hopefully, the editors can post a link to it.
Yeah, I think I might have it on my website. As a matter of fact, I do. I have a. You can. WilliamRempel.com.
We're gonna put up WilliamRempel.com. Obviously, it's The Gambler. You guys can see this book. This book is one of the best books I've ever written. I mean, I literally have I'm mildly obsessed. Okay. There's a lot of reasons why I'm mildly obsessed about this. Check out the book. I think it's available on audio too. I have it on audio. My son said he couldn't find it anymore on audio, but I can't imagine that it's not available. And if you have trouble, get a hold of me. Obviously, we'll make sure you can get the audio version. I'm sure Bill has a way of getting a hold of his publisher and saying, "What the hell are you guys doing?" Right?
Yeah, I think you find it in Barnes and Noble or Amazon as a audio version.
Oh, really?
I think so.
You
can also get it in Japanese, Russian, and Armenian.
I'm working on the 7 Secrets of Kirk Kerkorian. It's right here, but I can't tell you when it's going to be published. We have other things going on. Bill Rempel. I wanted to do this for a long time, and I hopefully we get to do it again. I don't know if there's something else we could. I mean, maybe there's a way for us to do a podcast again. Like we can Zoom in. Do you use Zoom at all?
I know how to do it. I have to remind myself every time.
But maybe we can be patient, right, Christy, and get them on Zoom. Before we sign off, is there any suggestions for people reading this book that you'd say, hey, like, I don't know, is there just there's so much in this that we didn't cover, right? It's a truly amazing piece of work, and I guess I've fanboyed you enough on this stuff, right?
Thanks.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Bill, we appreciate you. Really, we do.
My pleasure.
And I can't wait for everyone to watch this. I'm going to ask the editors to get it out as quickly as we can. And you and I have other business tonight.
Well, let's talk.
Yep. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.
No, I'm going to explain to you real quick.
Continue walking.
But don't roll on yet. There's a reason for it.
So I did get that right.
Yeah, you got it right.